Nickelodeon hates Avatar: The Last Airbender. That's right, it had to be said. Okay, maybe that's a little bit of a stretch, but the network definitely has a love-hate relationship with the beloved franchise. Since its initial release in 2005, all the way up to its record-breaking Netflix re-release in 2020, Avatar: The Last Airbender was both a commercial and critical success, and the show has quickly become one of Nick's flagship franchises. The show's success can largely be attributed to its beautifully rich world building, its cast of relatable characters, and its commitment to anime-influenced linear storytelling. But these are all things that you've already heard before, because everyone adores Avatar, except for Nickelodeon, which brings us back to today's topic, how the Avatar franchise was sometimes held back by the very studio that created it. In this video, I'm going to cover every single bump of the road, starting from the show's inception all the way up to the present day. Throughout this journey, you will see how love truly is a double-edged sword. Let's get into it. Starting off, Avatar's creators Bryan Konietzko and Mike DiMartino, often referred to as Bright by the fans, were actually approached by Nick to make the show. Now, at the time, this was a bit unheard of, since it's normally up to the show's creators to pitch to various studios looking for anyone who's interested. But in the case of Avatar: The Last Airbender, Bryan Konietzko had already worked with the studio before, and thus had already established a friendship with Nick's VP of animation, Eric Coleman. Specifically, Nick was looking for a new action and adventure series that could capitalize on the early 2000s craze for Legends and lore franchises like Harry Potter and The Lord of the Rings. Needless to say, Bright delivered, creating a vast fantasy world from scratch after only 2 weeks of brainstorming. It was during this early concept creation phase that Nickelodeon presented their first restriction to the show, limiting the depiction of physical violence. Now, admittedly, this isn't that big of a deal, and I'd be willing to bet that most shows airing on kids' networks had to censor themselves in similar ways. Still, I decided to mention this small hindrance because it eventually led to one of the most fundamental parts of the Avatar world, elemental bending. Bending was not only a genius way to incorporate natural elements into a magical combat system, but it was also a slick way to have stunning fight scenes without fists ever having to actually connect with faces. As a non-physical and non-lethal combat system, bending was perfectly suited for this mystical world. Well, at least it was mostly non-lethal, but more on that later. Now, the actual run of the original series basically went off without a hitch. The show was originally greenlit for 13 episodes, but the higher-ups at Nick liked what they saw so much that they went ahead and added 7 more episodes to the first season. The 13th episode of season 1 was The Blue Spirit. This could have been a really cool spot to end it on, but of course, I'm more than happy that the show was given the extra time to expand on its world and characters. At the peak of its popularity in its original run, Avatar: The Last Airbender was the most popular show on basic cable, with nearly 6 million people tuning in live to watch Aang fight Ozai during the season finale. By this point, Avatar's fanbase had built up a reputation for being one of the most interactive of any of Nick's properties. Not only was the Avatar message board the most visited section of Nick.com, Avatar fans also had a giant presence at real-life events like Comic-Con. It was reported that before Season 3 had even aired, fans of the show had already spent over $121 million on the Avatar franchise. And this number was predicted to double after the series finale. And it doesn't even take into account the money earned from commercials and ads. Rather, it only focuses on the revenue generated from merch sales, video games, toys, and DVDs. Needless to say, at this point, Nickelodeon was all aboard the Avatar money printing train. In a 2007 interview, then president of Nickelodeon, Seymour Zargami, optimistically said that the Avatar franchise was on the rise, with a loyal fan base willing to follow the characters anywhere. She noted that if the network played their cards right, Avatar could become their very own Harry Potter, a big-hitting franchise spanning multiple mediums, generations, and most importantly, bank accounts. Unfortunately, for Nickelodeon and Avatar fans alike, the very next sentence to come from Seymour's mouth in this interview was the following: "The movies will kick the business into high gear, and hopefully, when I'm replaced 10 years from now, someone will be making Avatar 10. You heard that right. She said the movies. Cue the music. Here's a trigger warning. That's right. Directly following the show's record-breaking and critically acclaimed original run, Nickelodeon thought that the best way to submit Avatar as a household franchise was to turn it into a live-action trilogy directed by none other than M. Night Shyamalan. At the time, Shyamalan, of course, wasn't yet known as the man responsible for eviscerating an entire beloved franchise. He was actually a respected up-and-comer in Hollywood with a few classics already under his belt. Nevertheless, Shyamalan was still a strange pick for the Avatar series. The franchise spans a lot of genres: action, adventure, comedy, martial arts, and family friendliness, but still it doesn't cross over that much with the mysteries and horror films that Shyamalan was known for at the time. There are plenty of red flags that Nickelodeon overlooked following M. Night's hiring, such as his previous two movies, which both ended up being commercial train wrecks. Both 2006's Lady in the Water and 2008's The Happening were such bizarre departures from Shyamalan's previous work that he had already become a bit of a laughingstock before The Last Airbender had even finished production. But Nickelodeon missed yet another opportunity to axe Shyamalan before things really got out of hand. I'm talking, of course, about the movie's casting. For a franchise that prides itself on its Asian-inspired roots and cultural inclusivity, Shyamalan's cast looked a tad bit, let's just say homogenous. Backlash quickly followed the cast announcement, with fans, journalists, and academics all wondering if there were any racial undertones motivating the decision. Rather than seeing this massive red flag for what it was and firing the project's main decision-maker, Nick decided to stick with Shyamalan and only forced him to change out Zuko's actor, Jesse McCartney, for the more ethnically diverse Dev Patel. Way to go, guys! Now all the good guys are white and all the bad guys are brown. That fixes literally nothing and makes things even worse somehow. We all know how this story ends.
That wasn't a good play.
I'll say. No kidding. Horrible. You said it.
But the effects were decent.
No, Sokka. No, the effects were not decent. They were trash too. Despite all of this nonsense, The Last Airbender movie wasn't technically a failure, because it still made a profit of about $20 million in the box office, and about $70 million when you factor in DVD sales. Still, the movie's horrific reception convinced Nickelodeon to make their first ever and their only ever good decision pertaining to this movie. They canceled the planned sequels. Remember Seema Zargami's quote about Avatar 10 coming out before she retired? Well, just be thankful we don't live in an even darker timeline where that actually could have happened. Before we jump into all of the problems surrounding The Legend of Korra, I think now would be a great opportunity to look at some of the more minor hiccups that Nickelodeon made when dealing with the original animated series. Let's start with the official Avatar The Last Airbender DVD release, and that it was absolutely terrible. I know a lot of you, me included, probably grew up with these DVDs and are feeling a little bit defensive right now, so let me explain. Most of the discs are perfectly fine, beautifully showcasing the hand-drawn animation in mid-2000s appropriate 480p resolution. However, notice how I said most of them are fine. The big problem lies with disc number 1 exclusively, the DVD that contains the first 4 episodes of the show. For whatever reason, this disc is the victim of a haloing double line effect that is so abhorrent the episodes are nearly unwatchable. I mean, just look at your screen right now. It's a mess. Or maybe it's not and I'm overreacting. I'm definitely a tad bit spoiled with all the 4K content of 2022. Let me know in the comments down below if you think this effect is as bad as I think it is. But regardless of what you think, I at least have Amazon reviewer Red G on my side. Red, of course, is practically world famous for ending his 4-star Amazon review by saying, "What's unfathomable to me is that the quality was not fixed between Book 1's original 2006 box set release and this complete collection in 2015. It's deplorable, a sorry state indeed." I agree, Red, it is a sorry state, and an embarrassing one too, since Nick had every opportunity in the world to fix this issue sometime during the past 16 years. But for whatever reason, they haven't. The only thing that Nick has changed about the DVDs in more than a decade and a half is the set's box art. This in my opinion, is a true disservice to the Avatar fans who were just trying to relive their favorite show. It wasn't until the Blu-ray upscaled version of the show began selling in 2018, 12 years after the fact, that fans were finally able to watch the first 4 episodes of Avatar with a little bit of dignity. While the DVDs offer one way to relive the magic of the original series, the other way to relive it is through reruns. And wouldn't you know it, Nickelodeon managed to flub their way through those as well. According to Avatar's creators, Mike and Brian, they initially butted heads with Nick execs about how reruns should be handled after the show ended. You see, the network, who was mostly familiar with anthology series like SpongeBob and the Fairly OddParents, noticed that Avatar reruns were performing relatively poorly. Bright took a look at the issue and suggested that rather than airing the episodes at random, like Nick often did with their other shows, they should instead air the Avatar episodes in order so that audiences could become invested in Aang and Zuko's stories. Rather than listening, Nick decided to try a few other strategies, including things like airing all the Sokka-focused episodes at once or airing all the coolest fight scenes together, but nothing was working. So eventually they decided to trust the creators and they just aired the episodes in order. Nick later informed Bright that once the change was made, Avatar's ratings skyrocketed again, and the show was the #1 show on the channel. Go figure. After the colossal failure that was the 2010 movie that shall not be named, Nickelodeon decided to go back to the Avatarverse source and directly asked Bright for more serious ideas. Bright pitched a concept for an animated movie that followed an older Gaang as they searched for Zuko's lost mother. This pitch was flat out rejected by Nick, said that they had no interest in straight-to-television animated movies at the time. Now, this is a bit surprising because if you ask most Avatar fans what future series they'd be most excited about, adventures with an older Gaang are usually at the top of their lists. Despite this small setback though, the network was so confident in Bright's abilities that they went ahead and greenlit a 12-episode-long miniseries without even needing another pitch meeting. The only requirements for the miniseries were A, it had to include bending, and B, it had to be in the Avatar universe. So the rejected pitch about a movie to find Zuko's mother was eventually adapted into a trilogy of graphic novels called The Search, while the greenlit miniseries went on to become Season 1 of The Legend of Korra. Nickelodeon mainly took a backseat regarding the development of the sequel Avatar show. Some executives did initially express concern over Korra being a female lead, because conventional knowledge reasoned that boys would not watch shows about girls, even though girls watch shows about boys all the time. But these fears were quickly quelled when boys who saw early test screenings of the show just thought that Korra was very awesome and very buff. And that's a pretty accurate assessment. So season 1 of Korra basically went off without a hitch. It wasn't until season 2 of the show that the network interference really began, and Nick's love-hate relationship with the franchise seemed to definitively tilt towards hate. Everyone knows about Saturday morning cartoons. They are a staple of nearly every generation, whether they be G.I. Joe, Pokemon, Sailor Moon, or the Magic School Bus. Saturday mornings were the prime time for animated shows because kids who were out of school had nothing better to do than to let their brains rot just a little bit. During its first season, The Legend of Korra aired during this coveted Saturday morning slot. However, when ratings began declining in the lead up to season 2, Nickelodeon booted the show to air instead on the less desirable Friday night. Nick defended the move by reasoning that Korra's older audience of teenagers was more active during the late afternoons than they were used to. That almost makes some sense, right? I thought so too at first, but the data clearly does not back this reasoning at all, since the viewership numbers continue to diminish into season 3. Now, the show was still very popular relative to other Friday night programming, just that the time slot itself was not as popular or as populated. So why didn't Nick at some point respond to the poor performance by moving the show back to Saturday mornings, where it had previously done very well? I'm not sure, and neither was Bright. There were several other factors that likely contributed to season 3's lackluster performance, the first of which was a total lack of marketing. The third season of The Legend of Korra was announced only a week before it premiered. 1 week. 7 days. That is almost unheard of, especially when compared to the modern practice of announcing new MCU projects years before they have even begun production. In addition to only giving the season a week of build-up, Nickelodeon also aired season 3 episodes 2 at a time, almost like they were trying to rush through the season as quickly as possible. It's just so weird. But these previous offenses all pale in comparison to what Nick did next. They pulled The Legend of Korra off the air and made it only viewable online at nick.com. You heard that right. Nickelodeon effectively soft-canceled one of their most popular shows in the middle of its best season. Because, by the way, Season 3 of The Legend of Korra was just, mwah, chef's kiss. And Bright was caught off guard too, since they were only notified a few hours before the announcement was publicly made.
Do you know of any other shows that were on air and then got, in mid-season, got relegated to digital?
I don't.
I think that might be that's a dubious honor.
Fans of the show immediately began speculating as to why the unprecedented move to digital was made, and many assumed that their question was answered 2 episodes later when this happened.
You think freedom is something that you can give or take on a whim. But to your people, freedom is just as essential as air. And without it, there is no life. There is only darkness.
Why was the show pulled from cable? Because suddenly it had become too mature for Nickelodeon's kid-friendly network. It almost made too much sense. But Mike and Brian have remained pretty adamant that the move to online wasn't influenced by the show's content at all. Rather, they repeatedly claimed that the show was moved online because it performed really well online, and that by moving it there, Nickelodeon was making an early play at the emerging online streaming market. But this doesn't make that much sense, because if a show is doing really well in one area, cable, and extremely well in another area, online, the solution to boosting one isn't to just completely cut out the other. And Brian seemed to have been on a similar wavelength, because at one point he asked,
You said, isn't that going to hurt the ratings if everyone's seen it online? They're like, those two audiences don't really cross over. So like, okay.
Listen, Nick, if we're to believe you, and the audiences don't cross over as you say, then why are you completely shutting the door on one of those audiences? They don't cross over. It just doesn't make any amount of sense, but I digress. As I mentioned before, on the scale from love to hate, Nickelodeon was definitely sending The Legend of Korra a whole bunch of mixed signals, and it only gets more convoluted in Korra's final season. Season 4 of The Legend of Korra also aired exclusively online, but regardless of that, production went pretty well until the network unexpectedly slashed an entire episode's worth of budget from the final season. We're talking a budget slash to the tunes of hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe even $1 million. This is once again bizarre behavior from Nick. Not only was The Legend of Korra still a very popular show with a very energetic fan base, but now, according to Nick, the show was supposedly the face of their entire online streaming strategy. Someone might want to tell Nickelodeon executives that it is usually not a great idea to shoot yourself directly in the foot. The budget cuts presented Bright with 2 paths forward. They could, 1, fire a bunch of their staff early, or 2, make a clips episode. Being such wholesome guys, they never even considered the first option. So that leaves the question, what exactly is a clips episode, and how are they made? Basically, clips episodes are a sitcom trope where all the characters sit around and say, "Hey, do you remember when?" followed by a montage of highlight clips from the show's previous seasons. It's kind of like the Emerald Island play from Avatar: The Last Airbender, but without all the new animation and innovative ideas. Clips episodes usually get a bad rap for being pointless and self-indulgent, and Bright was not happy about having to make one. They were so unhappy, in fact, that right before the episode aired online, Brian publicly posted to his Tumblr to explain the situation and to preemptively apologize for the clips-ridden episode Remembrances. In his post, Brian threw a lot of not-so-subtle shade towards the network, and despite Remembrances definitely feeling a bit off compared to the rest of the season, Bright was still able to keep it interesting. The final bit of network interference concerning The Legend of Korra involved the on-screen depiction of Korra and Asami's romantic relationship. Keep in mind, the final season of Korra aired in 2014. While that was only a few years ago, it was a vastly different era for LGBT rights. For context, at the time, only 18 countries out of 193 had legalized same-sex marriage, and the United States was not one of those 18 countries. It wasn't legal in the United States until 6 months after Korra ended in July 2015. All that to say that while it's not too surprising that while Nick was supportive of the idea of Korrasami, there were a lot of limitations involving how the romance was allowed to be shown, basically meaning that it wasn't allowed to be shown, like at all. During the final moments of the season finale, when Korra and Asami entered the spirit portal holding hands, it's no wonder why so many people felt like the romance had come completely out of left field. Because it kind of did, but by necessity. Yes, when revisiting the show, there were definitely strings and subtle hints sprinkled throughout the series pointing towards the idea of romance, but you can't blame someone for initially missing them because they were so small. I do not necessarily blame Nick for censoring Korrasami, because it was a needle that had to be threaded very carefully. For another example, the show Adventure Time faced a similar obstacle over on Cartoon Network. Only a month prior to Korra's Season 4 premiere, Adventure Time's creator confirmed during a book signing that the female characters Princess Bubblegum and Madeline had previously dated. While the news got cheers from the small audience attending the book signing, Adventure Time's creator had to further explain that the relationship could never actually be shown on the show because of its illegality in so many countries. This was the exact same pressure that Mike and Brian faced with Korrasami, so confirming the same-sex relationship at all was a giant gamble, one that seems to have paid off because Korra is now celebrated as a beacon for queer representation. Additionally, during Adventure Time's finale 4 years later, times had already changed so much that the show's creator finally felt confident enough to show this on screen. After Nickelodeon's blatant mishandling of the later seasons of Korra, and with no new plans for the Avatar franchise on the horizon, fans began to question the network's ulterior motives. Some began to imagine a world where Disney bought the franchise and continued to produce big-budget Avatar series. Others took to signing a 2015 Change.org petition that argued for Nickelodeon to license the franchise to Netflix. The petition, which stated that the possibilities are endless and is practically guaranteed that the show would be successful on Netflix, turned out to be right in a huge way. In the summer of 2020, Avatar: The Last Airbender became available on Netflix in the United States. What I'm sure Nick thought would be a big splash for the nostalgic show turned into a tsunami as the show captivated the world at large. The 2005 animated kids show went on to break the record to become the longest running series to stay on Netflix's top 10 chart, beating Tiger King, Stranger Things, and everything else. It was an extraordinary success, and Nick was definitely taking notes. Current president of Nickelodeon and recently appointed CEO of all of Paramount Pictures, Brian Robbins, recently revealed that a big part of Viacom CBS's current day strategy is licensed content. And by the way, for those who are unaware, Viacom CBS is Nickelodeon and Paramount's parent company. Yay, monopolies! Back to Brian Robbins. He explained that Viacom's main goal right now is to boost the number of subscribers to Paramount Plus, their streaming service. Viacom's tried and true method of getting extra eyeballs on their shiny new service is to first license content to the bigger players like Netflix so that these shows can attract new audiences. Then, once everyone watches the old show on Netflix and becomes hooked, Viacom ends the license and makes the show and all future content from the franchise exclusive to Paramount Plus subscribers. Viacom did this with iCarly, and now they're doing it with Avatar. Gotta love corporate America. So when Avatar became the biggest show on the planet during the summer of 2020, Nickelodeon's dream of having their very own Harry Potter-esque money machine came roaring back. Suddenly, Nickelodeon was firmly planting themselves back on the love side of the love-hate equation. That's where they'd like to stay. Nickelodeon immediately hit up Mike and Brian with a new offer. Not for a new show or a new movie, but for a new studio completely under Bryce's control. Avatar Studios is an extremely ambitious effort to once again turn the Avatarverse franchise into a household name. Bryce will be juggling multiple projects at once, including movies and TV shows, books and video games, animation and live action, past, present, and future reincarnations of the Avatar. Viacom recently offered the creators of South Park a very similar deal for the development of Paramount Plus exclusives. There's no word on the precise monetary value of the Avatar Studios deal, but given these shows' new status as a bankable franchise, alongside the confirmed $900 million that Viacom just gave South Park's creator for a similar deal, I've no doubt that Mike and Brian are finally getting their due. Because whether Nickelodeon loves Avatar, or whether they hate it, at the end of the day, one thing has always been true. money talks. And right now, people are screaming for more Avatar: The Last Airbender. So there you have it. That was my first ever YouTube video. It took a while to make, and it is much longer than I expected it to be. And I am definitely not used to the sound of my own voice. But if you made it all the way through and can even hear this message, then just go ahead and press subscribe, ring the bell, and all that, because you clearly like Avatar, and you clearly appreciate in-depth analysis about Avatar. And that's basically what I'm going to be doing here. This video was more about production and how the franchise was created, but future videos are going to talk about Avatar lore and Easter eggs and secrets and stuff like that. So if you love Avatar, then you are in the right place.